Excuse me a second. Let the record reflect that the defendant is laughing during the victim impact statement.
How y'all want to make this level?
The courtroom falls silent as the judge's gavel strikes down. A young girl is dead, a 101-year-old woman violated in her own home. And yet, the defendants, teenagers with their whole lives ahead of them, are laughing. In the Albany County Courthouse, 17-year-old Alvin Foy smirks and chuckles as the family of China Forney, the innocent 18-year-old he gunned down in a drive-by shooting, pour their hearts out in victim impact statements. His behavior so disruptive, so disrespectful, that Judge William Carter is forced to remove him from his own sentencing hearing. "You find this funny?" the judge demands, his voice tight with controlled fury. "Get him out of my courtroom." Meanwhile, in Milwaukee, Antoine Pettis grins broadly at cameras during his arraignment. The 16-year-old had broken into the home of a 101-year-old woman, a woman who lived through the Great Depression, 2 world wars, and the Civil Rights Movement, only to sexually assault her and leave her injured and traumatized. When caught, his concern wasn't remorse, it was fame. "I'm going to be famous," he reportedly told officers. 2 cities, 2 heinous crimes, 2 teenagers who thought the justice system was a joke. They're not laughing anymore. Today we're diving deep into these disturbing cases that shocked communities and left families devastated. We'll trace how these teens went from cocky courtroom performances to the crushing reality of decades behind bars. We'll examine the evidence that sealed their fates, the investigations that brought them to justice, and the moment when their smirks finally faded. Before we continue, if you're new here, my channel Mind of a Killer explores the darkest corners of true crime with respect for the victims and a focus on justice. Hit that subscribe button and notification bell right now so you never miss an upload. Your support helps me continue bringing these important stories to light. I'm curious, where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below. Knowing my audience helps me create content that resonates with viewers from all walks of life. Now let's return to Albany, New York, where on a spring afternoon in 2021, gunshots would shatter a community and end the promising life of a young woman just weeks away from her high school graduation. Albany, New York, a city of contrasts. Historic brownstones and government buildings stand alongside neighborhoods struggling with poverty and violence. On May 3, 2021, as spring finally took hold after a long pandemic winter, Essex Street in the West Hill neighborhood was alive with activity. Children played on front stoops, neighbors chatted across fences, and 18-year-old China Forney walked with friends, enjoying the warm afternoon sunshine. China wasn't supposed to be on Essex Street that day. A senior at Albany Leadership Charter High School for Girls, she typically would have been in class, but like millions of American students, her education had been disrupted by COVID-19. Remote learning days gave her flexibility, and she decided to visit friends in the neighborhood. Those who knew China described her as vibrant and determined. With graduation just weeks away, she had plans, big ones, college applications submitted, dreams of studying business, a future mapped out with the kind of optimism only youth can sustain. Her mother, Shauna Davis, had watched her daughter blossom from a shy child into a confident young woman with a radiant smile that could light up a room. "She was my only daughter," Shauna would later tell the court, her voice breaking, "my baby girl." At approximately 2:50 p.m., as China walked with friends near the intersection of Essex and Quayle Streets, a silver Honda Accord cruised slowly down the block. The windows rolled down. The muzzle of a 9mm handgun emerged, and in an instant, the trajectory of multiple lives changed forever. Witnesses would later describe hearing between 6 and 8 shots in rapid succession. Shell casings scattered across the pavement like deadly confetti. People screamed, ran for cover, called 911. When the chaos subsided, China lay motionless on the sidewalk, blood pooling beneath her body. A single bullet had struck her in the back. First responders arrived within minutes, but it was already too late. China Forney was pronounced dead at the scene, another statistic in America's epidemic of gun violence. Another young life extinguished before it had truly begun. The silver Honda had already disappeared, but the investigation was just beginning. Albany Police Detective Division immediately deployed its resources. Officers canvassed the neighborhood, collecting witness statements. Crime scene technicians gathered shell casings and marked bullet trajectories. Detectives pulled footage from nearby security cameras and traffic lights. What emerged was a disturbing picture. The shooting wasn't random, but China wasn't the intended target. According to investigators, the gunfire had been meant for another individual in the area, part of an ongoing dispute between rival groups. China Forney, with her college dreams and bright future, had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time. Within 48 hours, police had identified the vehicle used in the shooting. The silver Honda Accord had been reported stolen days earlier. It was found abandoned in a parking lot 5 miles from the crime scene, wiped clean of fingerprints, but containing trace evidence that would prove crucial. The breakthrough came 3 weeks later. Ballistics from the shell casings matched a weapon used in another incident. Surveillance footage, cell phone records, and witness statements converged on 2 suspects, 17-year-old Alvin Foy and 19-year-old Jamir Manning. On May 26, 2021, Albany SWAT teams executed simultaneous raids, taking both teens into custody. Neither showed remorse during questioning. According to court documents, when told a young woman had died in the shooting, Foy allegedly shrugged and said, "That's not on me. She shouldn't have been there." The Albany County District Attorney's Office charged both teens with second-degree murder, second-degree attempted murder, first-degree reckless endangerment, and criminal possession of a weapon. Despite their youth, they would be tried as adults due to the severity of the crime. Manning, facing overwhelming evidence and the possibility of 25 years to life, accepted a plea deal. In exchange for testifying against Foy, prosecutors reduced his charges to first-degree manslaughter. He would receive a 20-year sentence. Foy, however, chose to go to trial, a decision that would expose not just the details of the crime, but the shocking callousness of its perpetrator. The trial began in March 2022. The prosecution built a methodical case, ballistics evidence linking the recovered shell casings to a weapon connected to Foy, cell phone records placing him near the scene, surveillance footage showing the silver Honda, and damning testimony from Manning, who identified Foy as the shooter. "He just started blasting," Manning testified. "He didn't even look to see who was there, just started shooting out the window." Throughout the proceedings, Foy's behavior raised eyebrows. He appeared disinterested, sometimes smirking during testimony. When crime scene photos were shown, he whispered and laughed with his defense attorney. Judge William Carter admonished him repeatedly. The jury deliberated for just 6 hours before returning with their verdict, guilty on all counts. The sentencing hearing on April 14, 2022, would become infamous in Albany County Court. As China's family prepared to deliver victim impact statements, Foy's demeanor shifted from indifference to outright mockery. Shauna Davis approached the podium, clutching a framed photo of her daughter. "My child was everything to me," she began, tears streaming down her face. She had her whole life ahead of her. College, career, maybe someday a family of her own. You took all of that away. From the defense table came a sound that shocked the courtroom. Laughter. Foy was chuckling, whispering to his attorney, rolling his eyes at China's mother's pain. Judge Carter's gavel came down hard. "Mr. Foy, this is not amusing. This is not entertainment. A young woman is dead." But Foy continued, muttering under his breath, smirking at China's relatives. When her aunt rose to speak, describing how China had helped care for younger cousins, Foy's laughter became audible again. "That's enough," Judge Carter declared, his patience exhausted. "You find this funny? Get him out of my courtroom." Court officers removed Foy to a holding cell, where he would listen to the remainder of the proceedings via intercom. His absence did nothing to diminish the power of the moment when Judge Carter delivered his sentence, 25 years to life for second-degree murder, with additional time for the weapons charges to be served consecutively. "In my 20 years on the bench," Judge Carter stated, "I have rarely seen such a complete absence of remorse or basic human decency. Your behavior today only confirms what your actions demonstrated on May 3rd last year, a callous disregard for human life." The sentencing made headlines across New York State. Local news outlets captured the reactions of Albany residents, many of whom had followed the case closely. Outside the courthouse, a community that had rallied around China's family expressed relief that justice had been served, but also sorrow that nothing could bring back the vibrant young woman they had lost. In the weeks following the sentencing, Albany Leadership Charter High School for Girls established the China Forney Memorial Scholarship, awarded annually to a graduating senior pursuing business studies, the path China herself had hoped to follow. At Albany High School's graduation ceremony that June, an empty chair draped with flowers stood among the graduates, a poignant reminder of a future stolen by senseless violence. Hey, I'm curious. What time is it where you're watching right now? Drop it in the comments below. I always wonder about my viewers around the world tuning in at different hours. If you're finding this story as powerful and disturbing as I did while researching it, please hit that like button. It helps the algorithm share this video with others who appreciate in-depth true crime analysis. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now's the perfect time. We're just getting to the second shocking case where justice finally caught up to a teen who thought his crimes would make him famous. Milwaukee, Wisconsin, a city built on beer, manufacturing, and Midwestern values. In the northwest neighborhood of Washington Park, modest homes line quiet streets where many residents have lived for decades. One such resident was a 101-year-old woman who had seen the world transform across a century. From horse-drawn carriages to smartphones, from women gaining the right to vote to the election of America's first black president. For privacy reasons, her name was never released to the public, but court documents tell us she was born in 1913, lived independently despite her advanced age, and was described by neighbors as a neighborhood grandmother who would sit on her porch in warm weather, waving to passers-by and occasionally offering cookies to children walking home from school. In the early morning hours of September 1, 2014, Labor Day, while most of Milwaukee celebrated the unofficial end of summer with barbecues and family gatherings, something unthinkable happened in this centenarian's home. At approximately 2:00 a.m., as she slept in her bedroom, a young man forced open a rear window of her house. Moving quietly through the darkened home, 16-year-old Antoine Devon Pettis made his way to her bedroom. According to court records, he initially intended only to burglarize the residence, but upon discovering the elderly woman alone and vulnerable, his crime escalated to something far more heinous. The details of the assault are difficult to recount. Pettis sexually assaulted the 101-year-old woman who was physically unable to fight back or call for help. When he finished, he simply left her there, injured, traumatized, and alone in the dark. It wasn't until nearly 12 hours later that a family member conducting a routine check-in discovered the victim. The scene that greeted this relative was devastating. The elderly woman was still in her bed, disoriented and in pain, unable to fully articulate what had happened to her. Emergency services were immediately called. Paramedics transported her to Aurora Sinai Medical Center, where doctors confirmed the sexual assault and treated her for various injuries, including significant bruising and tissue damage. At 101 years old, her body was fragile. The physical trauma was severe. But perhaps even more profound was the psychological impact, the violation of safety in her own home where she had lived independently for decades. She kept asking why someone would do this to her, a family member later told reporters. What had she done to deserve this? How could she ever feel safe again? The Milwaukee Police Department's Sensitive Crimes Division took charge of the investigation, treating the case with the highest priority. Detectives processed the scene meticulously, collecting fingerprints, fibers, and, crucially, DNA evidence from the victim's bedroom. The community reacted with horror and outrage. Local news stations covered the story extensively. Neighbors established a watch program. City officials promised swift justice, and detectives worked around the clock, knowing that the perpetrator of such a crime might strike again. Initially, investigators had little to go on. No witnesses had seen anyone enter or leave the home. The victim could provide only vague details about her attacker, that he was young, African-American, and of medium build. Fingerprints collected at the scene yielded no matches in law enforcement databases, But the DNA evidence would prove to be the key that unlocked the case. When the Wisconsin State Crime Laboratory processed samples collected from the victim and her bedding, they identified a complete male DNA profile. When run through CODIS, the combined DNA index system, however, no direct match was found. The perpetrator's DNA wasn't in the system yet. This is where cutting-edge forensic science entered the picture. Milwaukee detectives requested a familial DNA search, a relatively new technique that looks not for exact matches but for close relatives who share significant portions of DNA with the unknown subject. This method had been used successfully in other states, but was still considered somewhat experimental in Wisconsin. The familial search yielded a promising lead, a convicted felon whose DNA profile showed strong similarities to the unknown assailant. This individual wasn't the perpetrator, but the genetic markers suggested he was likely a close relative, possibly a brother, father, or son. Detectives began investigating the felon's family members, creating a list of male relatives who matched the general description of the attacker. Among them was Antoine Devon Pettis, a 16-year-old with a juvenile record for burglary and theft. When investigators located Pettis and obtained a DNA sample through a court order, the results were conclusive. A perfect match to the evidence collected at the crime scene. On November 17, 2014, 2.5 months after the assault, Milwaukee police arrested Pettis at a relative's home. What happened next shocked even veteran detectives. During processing at the Milwaukee County Jail, Pettis showed no remorse. Instead, according to court documents, he seemed almost pleased with the attention. When informed that his case was receiving significant media coverage, he allegedly smiled and said, "I'm going to be famous because I did this to an old lady." The statement was so disturbing that the booking officer included it in his report, and prosecutors would later reference it during court proceedings as evidence of Pettis's callous attitude toward his victim. Despite being 16 at the time of the crime, Pettis was charged as an adult due to the severity of the offense. The charges included first-degree sexual assault, aggravated burglary, and battery. If convicted on all counts, he faced up to 60 years in prison. His first court appearance on November 19, 2014, set the tone for what would follow. As cameras rolled in the Milwaukee County Courthouse, Pettis entered with what reporters described as a smirk. When Judge Jeffrey Wagner read the charges, Pettis appeared to be suppressing laughter. His attorney had to repeatedly advise him to maintain appropriate courtroom demeanor. Initially, Pettis pleaded not guilty by reason of mental disease or defect, a plea that required psychological evaluation. Court-appointed psychiatrists conducted extensive interviews and testing over several weeks. Their conclusion, presented to the court in January 2015, found that while Pettis had some cognitive limitations and impulse control issues, he was fully capable of understanding the wrongfulness of his actions and was competent to stand trial. With the insanity defense no longer viable and DNA evidence irrefutable, Pettis's legal options narrowed. In February 2015, facing overwhelming evidence and the prospect of a trial that would likely end in conviction, he changed his plea to guilty on all counts. The sentencing hearing on March 16, 2015, drew significant media attention. The courtroom was packed with reporters, victims' advocates, and community members. The victim herself, now 102, was too frail to attend, but family members were present to speak on her behalf. Her grandson, a man in his 60s, addressed the court with quiet dignity. "My grandmother survived 2 world wars. She lived through the Great Depression. She raised children during the Civil Rights Movement. She has seen this country transform in ways most of us can't imagine. And in her 101st year, this young man took something from her that can never be restored: her sense of safety, her dignity, her peace of mind in the twilight of her life." Throughout this testimony, Pettis sat at the defense table, occasionally rolling his eyes or whispering to his attorney. When Judge Wagner admonished him to show respect, Pettis responded with a shrug that was captured by courtroom cameras and would later appear on local news broadcasts. When given the opportunity to address the court before sentencing, Pettis offered what many described as a perfunctory apology. "I'm sorry for what happened. I wasn't thinking right." The statement, delivered without emotion and while looking at the floor rather than at the victim's family, did little to suggest genuine remorse. Judge Wagner's response was unequivocal. "Mr. Pettis," he began, "the court has rarely encountered a crime that so thoroughly shocks the conscience of the community. You violated the sanctity of a home and the dignity of a woman who had lived a century of life with grace and respect. Your behavior today, and your reported comments about achieving fame through this heinous act, suggest you fail to comprehend the gravity of what you have done." The sentence came down like a hammer: 30 years in prison, followed by 15 years of extended supervision. Pettis would be 46 years old before he would be eligible for release, by which time his victim would long since have passed away. As court officers led Pettis away, his facade finally cracked. The smirk disappeared, replaced by what one reporter described as the face of a teenager suddenly confronting the reality of 3 decades behind bars. The case had profound impacts beyond the courtroom. In Milwaukee, it sparked discussions about elder safety and vulnerability. Social service agencies reported increased requests for home security assessments from elderly residents. The City Council approved additional funding for programs supporting independent seniors. For the law enforcement community, the case highlighted the value of familial DNA searching as an investigative tool. The Wisconsin State Crime Laboratory, which had conducted the crucial analysis, saw increased requests for similar searches in other cold cases. And for the victim, the 101-year-old woman whose name we'll never know, life would never be the same. Unable to return to independent living after the assault, she moved into a nursing facility where she could receive round-the-clock care. Family members reported that while physically she recovered as well as could be expected for someone her age, emotionally the trauma lingered. She passed away in late 2015 at the age of 102, having lived through an ordeal that no person of any age should ever experience, let alone someone who had already given a century of life to this world. Hey, I'm taking a quick break from this intense story to connect with you all. What's the weather like where you are today? Drop it in the comments below. I love imagining all of you watching from sunny beaches, rainy cities, or snowy mountains across the country and around the world. If this story has impacted you the way it impacted me while researching it, please consider sharing this video with someone who appreciates thoughtful true crime content. Your shares help these important stories reach a wider audience and ensure that victims' experiences aren't forgotten. And if you're finding value in this deep dive, hitting that like button really helps the channel grow. 2 cities, nearly 900 miles apart, 2 crimes separated by 7 years, 2 victims, one at the beginning of adult life, one nearing its end. 2 perpetrators who thought their actions were somehow amusing. As we step back and examine these cases together, the parallels become not just apparent, but profoundly disturbing. Alvin Foy and Antoine Pettis never met. They grew up in different environments, committed different crimes, and faced different judges. Yet the thread connecting them is unmistakable: a shocking absence of empathy, a disregard for human dignity, and perhaps most tellingly their behavior in the courtroom. Both young men laughed in the face of justice. Both smirked as victims and families recounted their suffering. Both seemed to view the legal proceedings as some form of entertainment, rather than the solemn reckoning it was meant to be. This courtroom behavior wasn't just disrespectful, it offered a window into the mindset that enabled their crimes in the first place. Psychologists who study criminal behavior point to this disconnect as a red flag. Dr. Catherine Ramsland, a forensic psychologist who has written extensively on criminal psychology, notes, "When we see defendants laughing or smirking during proceedings, especially in violent cases, it often indicates a profound empathy deficit. They're unable to process the gravity of their actions or the suffering they've caused." This empathy deficit manifested differently in each case. Foy's random gunfire showed a callous disregard for whoever might be in the bullet's path. Pettis's assault on a centenarian demonstrated an inability to recognize the humanity in someone vulnerable. Both reflect what criminologists call moral disengagement, the psychological process of detaching oneself from the ethical implications of one's actions. Another striking parallel lies in the forensic evidence that brought both teens to justice. In Foy's case, ballistics evidence linked shell casings to a weapon connected to him. In Pettis's case, DNA evidence, specifically the cutting-edge technique of familial DNA matching, provided the crucial breakthrough. Both represent the increasing difficulty of escaping accountability in an age of advanced forensic science. The science of criminal investigation has evolved dramatically, explains former FBI profiler James Fitzgerald. 30 years ago, both of these perpetrators might have escaped justice. Today, between surveillance technology, DNA analysis, digital footprints, and ballistics databases, the net closes much more quickly and completely. This evolution of forensic capabilities raises an important question. If potential offenders understood the near inevitability of being caught, would they still commit these crimes? The evidence suggests that many young offenders, particularly those under 25, don't fully process long-term consequences due to still developing prefrontal cortices, the brain region responsible for impulse control and decision-making. Yet the justice system, while acknowledging the science of brain development, must still hold offenders accountable. In both cases, the sentences reflected this balance, severe enough to protect society and deliver justice, yet structured to acknowledge the possibility, however remote, of rehabilitation. Foy received 25 years to life, with the possibility of parole after serving his minimum sentence. Pettis received 30 years, with 15 years of extended supervision following release. Both will spend what should have been the prime of their lives behind bars. Both will emerge from prison middle-aged men in a world that will have moved on without them. The consequences extend far beyond the perpetrators themselves. Families on all sides bear the weight of these crimes. China Forney's mother, Shauna Davis, must navigate life without her daughter. No graduation celebrations, no wedding day, no grandchildren from her only daughter. The family of the 101-year-old Milwaukee victim spent her final months helping her cope with trauma no centenarian should ever experience. Even the families of Foy and Pettis suffer collateral damage, parents, siblings, and extended family members who must reconcile their love for these young men with the horrific acts they committed. Many cut ties, others maintain relationships while condemning the crimes. All live with a complex grief that has no roadmap. Communities, too, are transformed by such high-profile cases. In Albany, China's death sparked renewed conversations about gun violence and youth intervention programs. In Milwaukee, the assault on a 101-year-old woman led to increased resources for elder protection and safety. Both cities saw neighborhood watch programs expand and community policing initiatives strengthen. These responses reflect a fundamental human need to derive meaning from tragedy, to ensure that victims didn't suffer in vain. The scholarships, foundations, and policy changes that often follow such cases represent attempts to balance the cosmic scales when justice alone feels insufficient. Perhaps the most profound connection between these cases lies in what they reveal about laughter itself. In both courtrooms, inappropriate laughter served not as an expression of joy, but as a defense mechanism, a way to distance oneself from unbearable reality. Psychologists call this incongruous laughter, a response that emerges when someone cannot process the gravity of a situation. When we see defendants laugh during serious proceedings, it's rarely genuine amusement, explains forensic psychiatrist Dr. Helen Morrison. It's more often a maladaptive coping strategy, a way to create psychological distance from actions too terrible to acknowledge. This insight doesn't excuse the behavior, but may help explain it. The smirks and chuckles that so infuriated judges, victims' families, and observers alike may have been the last desperate attempts of young minds unable to face the enormity of what they had done and what awaited them. In the end, justice was served in both cases, though no sentence can truly compensate for the lives destroyed. China Forney will never graduate college, build a career, or start a family. The 101-year-old Milwaukee victim spent her final months processing a trauma no person should ever endure, let alone someone who had already given a century to this world. As for Foy and Pettis, their laughter has long since faded. Prison records indicate that both have struggled with the reality of incarceration, The bravado displayed in court has given way to the grinding monotony of life behind bars. The fame Pettis sought has materialized only as infamy, his name a cautionary tale rather than the celebrity he imagined. These cases, difficult as they are to contemplate, serve an important purpose. They remind us that actions have consequences, that justice, while imperfect, does function, that victims deserve to be remembered not just for how they died or suffered, but for how they lived and what they gave to the world. If you've stayed with me through both of these difficult stories, I want to thank you. True crime isn't about sensationalism. It's about understanding the darkest aspects of humanity so that we might better protect the light. If you found value in this exploration, please consider subscribing to Mind of a Killer and sharing this video with others who appreciate thoughtful analysis of true crime cases. Your support allows me to continue bringing these stories to light with the respect and care they deserve. Next week, we'll examine another case that challenges our understanding of justice, the story of a wrongful conviction overturned after 27 years and the surprising reaction of the man who lost nearly 3 decades of his life to a crime he didn't commit. How does someone find forgiveness after such an injustice? Join me to find out. Until then, stay safe, stay compassionate, and remember that behind every headline is a human story that deserves to be told with dignity.